Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Book Report. It can be argued, and it's being argued in some circles, that, we've been entering a dark age, a time when civilization loses a lot of rationality to it, when insanity seems to be ruling the roost, when people can't seem to get it through their heads that 2 and 2 is 4 and not 22. It wasn't always this way. Science used to drive much of our civilization. Thomas Jefferson wanted to be a scientist, said he was. Arguably, Benjamin Franklin was quite an accomplished scientist. And in the 1960s, we used science to go from the Earth to the Moon. We have since learned a lot about the universe around us. We've sent probes out into deep space. We've looked into the center of atoms and beyond. It's amazing what we've been able to learn. Yet civilization seems to be slipping away. Fear, superstition, and especially paranoia are the watchwords of the times we live in. People complain how crazy everything is, or use the term clown world. That's a very, very useful term, clown world. Yes, it's a real thing. How did we get this way? Well, in the last decade of the 20th century, a very famous scientist at the time described not only how we were losing our grip on reality and critical thinking, but where it could all go. The scientist was an astronomer named Carl Sagan, very well known, even today. He wrote many books, but his last book is one that has a great deal of relevance to the times we find ourselves in and what is needed to pull ourselves out of the dive into the abyss. The book I'm talking about is The Demon-Haunted World: Science as a Candle in the Dark. It was Dr. Sagan's last book, and it dealt with the dangers of letting irrational thinking and non-scientific reasoning rule our world. I read the book way back when it came out. It was his last book. Sadly, he died the year after it came out. The book was initially published in 1995. He passed away from cancer in 1996 at the all-too young age of 62. And you can tell in reading this book that this is one he really put his soul into. It's an easy read. Now, for those of you who've never read any of Sagan's books, I would recommend all of them. An earlier book, Cosmos, I read when I was in high school, and it was something that just fired my imagination like nothing until that time. His books have an interesting flavor to them. They're somewhat autobiographical, and he very much writes in the first person when he can. I don't think this was an ego trip on his part, although some people have accused him of that. I think it was more of him trying to be relatable to the reader. The book has many different chapters in it, and his co-author, who was also his wife, Anne Druin, did 4 chapters of it. And for want of a better word, it's a manual on scientific thinking and an attack on the culture at the time. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, am I glad that he didn't live to see where we are now. He definitely would have been very perturbed at the fact that there are people making decent livings by purporting that the earth is flat and other such insanity. He, of course, attacks astrology, the Atlantis myth, that's one of his favorites, and that's all well and good. He's pointing out something very important for anyone who gets into anything that's on the edge. And that is that you have to have proof to make your point. You can make a claim, but you have to be able to back it up with solid, verifiable facts. In reality, at one time, scientists were considered mystics because they would come up with bizarre theories like, the Earth turns around the sun. All those stars you see up there, they're actually other suns. Those were very revolutionary and thought to be pseudoscience at the time, but what proved them over time was that proof. Verifiable proof. The telescope proved it. Mathematics, calculating the patterns of the orbits of the planets. These were things that Sagan was big on because he was an astronomer, but he was also into all other aspects of science. The Demon-Haunted World is a very good manual on scientific thinking that can be applied to just about anything. And Sagan had a lot of fun with it. Now, my favorite lesson out of the book is called The Dragon in the Garage, and I'm going to give you a spoiler on this if you haven't read it, but he points out in that chapter that, well, he tells somebody that there's a dragon in my garage. Oh, really? Let's go see. And he goes there, opens the door, and there's no dragon. Where's the dragon? Oh, it's an invisible dragon. And then I said, okay, well, why don't we get some flour and put it on the floor of the garage, and then when the dragon walks around, we'll see its footprints. Oh, no, it's a floating dragon. Oh, I see. Well, maybe we should get some infrared cameras, and then we can pick up its body heat. Oh, it's cold-blooded. We can't pick up any heat. What about when it breathes fire? Oh, it's a special type of cold fire. You see how this goes. You see nothing, and what do you get? A dragon. This is the sort of thinking that a lot of people have. And it's not making our world a better place, especially here in the United States, where insanity seems to have run its course, one would hope, but it's not dead yet. And I'm not going to list all the craziness that we see in the daily headlines or what is generally referred to as clown world. But if you follow my work here on the Aurelium column, you kind of know where I'm coming from in that department. It's a pretty easy book to read. It's a good weekend read. It's about 450 pages. You can get it in softcover. The hardcovers are not available anymore. They're collector's items. They go for like $70 to $100 or more. Probably more if you autograph them. But you can get it in Audible, audiobooks. You can get it in Kindle and other sorts. It's a very good book to have around. Now, here's a suggestion. And this is something that had Dr. Sagan lived, he probably would have come up with. This would be a great book to give young people if it was edited in the right way. It would be a good base for let's say, a middle school science book to get people into the scientific way of thinking. Actually, I had run across my old 7th grade science book about a year and a half ago. Somebody showed it to me, and I remembered it, and I was able to go through it and said, yeah, this is pretty solid stuff. It's probably would be a difficult level to teach at universities these days. We used to have much better training in our country, much better vigor in how we learn things. And this is why I like this book, because it brings me back to the good old days of the late 20th century when we actually had optimism about changing the path of certain things. And sadly, when you do read this book, especially near the end of it, you're going to be rather disturbed that he was predicting an awful lot of the craziness we have now. Unless we take the lessons to heart that Dr. Sagan was trying to put forth in his book and banish the real demons, which are ignorance, superstition, paranoia, and just plain stupidity, well, we don't have much of a future, and it's doubtful we'll ever reach the stars that he was so much in love with. Again, the book is The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. Very timely to read. It's available, of course, on the usual formats and in the usual places. It's currently put out by Ballantine Books. The reissue was 1997. And the author was Dr. Carl Sagan. All of his books I would recommend, but this one especially. As I like to say at the end of my regular podcasts, Clown World must be destroyed, and this book will help in that endeavor. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends, and share with your enemies, especially if they believe the earth is flat. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. You can also find me up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and keep reading. Good day.